Hi, my name's Joshua, and I am the writer and director of Ash's Homecoming. Thank you so much for listening to this commentary track. This has been the last 2 to 3 years of my life, and really 7 years since I first began work on Spielberg. So I'm so lucky to have had this opportunity to do a third one. And this first scene, this picture right here, is from the very first episode of Pokemon where Ash gets his first Pokemon. Really the magic that has stayed alive with me for the last 20 years. And this scene really was meant to show where Ash began as a very determined, a very enthusiastic young person, but wanting to be the very best kind of for the wrong reasons. Every character in this film is a foil. So you have Professor Oak, who's really the foil of who Ash could be. You know, somebody who has lived life and encourages Ash to seek more than just, power, as we'll see a little bit later on. Now, Professor Oak passing, that sort of was the catalyst for the entire story, because, of course, when somebody passes away, a lot of things happen. My grandmother and more recently my grandfather passed away, and really puts life into perspective and really makes you appreciate life and try to find out what's important. And you saw there was 17 years later. That's because when Ash started on his Pokemon journey, he was 10. And when I made this film, I was 27. So I kind of wanted to see what Ash's life would be like right next to my own. And all around this room are all of my friends and family and people that have joined us on this adventure. And that always brings joy to my heart to see everyone in the same room together and seeing their faces on the screen. So thanks to everyone who came out for that awesome shoot there. And our introduction to Ash Ketchum, was I think something from the concept art was, Ash coming in as a silhouette and coming back to a world that he's very foreign in. He hasn't been back in so many years. Ash is a little bit stuck in, competing and still in that old way of thinking. And right there, that was a really cool transition that my DP Alan Chung came up with, where we had everyone sitting, and then without cutting, we had everyone take a second position, and then by doing that crossfade, you could see the time lapse, of course. So I really love that shot. And here we have Brock. And for anyone who's seen the show, Brock was a womanizer. He always wanted to basically be with any girl that he came across. So in this script, I wanted to totally flip him and make him the guy that actually matured and committed, and now he's a family. And I feel like I hope we did a really good job of showing this, another version of what Ash could be if he chose that. Of course, we also have Lola, and Lola is a reference to Brock's mom in the anime. Her name was Lola. In the original script, we had actually a whole bunch of siblings for Lola. Brock had a big family. I thought it'd be funny if he had a lot of kids. And for very practical purposes, we said, okay, we probably shouldn't have that many kids running around on set. And as for Daisy, it was hard I was trying to figure out, okay, who would Brock end up with? And I thought Daisy ended up being a really good choice, even though she's a little bit more obscure. She's, of course, one of Misty's older sisters. But also seeing her become more mature and be protective of and try to be responsible. And so creating that family unit, that was really important to contrast with Ash. Right there, you saw the new Tetris. That was my favorite N64 game growing up. And all these medals and some of my old karate awards there, all of that's supposed to show how that was his original dream, was to be the very best. And it's sort of meaningless. He's collected all of this sort of worthless stuff that really doesn't have any value. You saw there on the wall is Veronica Taylor, the original voice of Ash Ketchum. So, one of my heroes. So, thank you, Veronica. And here we have Ash sitting in his childhood bedroom. And this was inspired by my experience of, returning home after many years away at college and coming back, and your childhood bedroom is still sort of preserved. Everything that you liked a long time ago is still there. So it was fun to sort of try to recreate that bedroom setting from the show. And here we are in Carbon Canyon, out in nature. We had a little bit of a drive, and it was really fun because I had never even been there, but we walked around and we just found some amazing locations and amazing, beautiful shots, and sort of shaped this whole sequence in post. And it sort of is a trip down memory lane because, of course, you saw Caterpie and you heard a Pidgey fly out of the bushes, and those were the first two Pokemon that Ash encountered on his original journey. And it's sort of preparing us for this scene. For Ash to sort of have this recollection of when he first met Misty. We actually shot this in Long Beach at a place called Colorado Lagoon, and it's just this like literally 20-foot area of space, and right outside the boundaries are like cars, and there's a beach, and there's all these, there's houses. So right outside the frames, we couldn't have shot any wider than we did here. And working with these two young actors was just amazing. Their energy is, off the charts, and it was just so fun to have that experience, a different perspective. So thank you to them for giving me that opportunity. And I always loved this scene in the show, but I wanted to turn that scene into the first example of Ash breaking a promise. He makes this promise to bring the bicycle back to Misty, but in the show, he never does. And we'll get to that later, but that was sort of the whole tipping point for me, was what would happen if, he did bring the bicycle back. Now, here we are on the top of Rooster Rock in Irvine Regional Park. It was very hot. We were shooting there all day, and we had a blast, but it was on the clock. We had a lot to do. We had two big scenes with Giovanni and Team Rocket and Ash and Delia to shoot, and try to keep cool, try to bring a lot of water. Now, Giovanni, what an awesome performance, and what an awesome character. And he is the opposite of Professor Oak. He's meant to represent what happens if you become the very best. If you actually keep going and pursue power, and don't make any friends, and you become isolated. What do you want? That's what Giovanni represents, and that's somebody Ash could become. And so you have this sort of duality, and I really like that idea that this was sort of very archetypal almost. Has he gone insane? And the second that, we open the can of worms into Giovanni being Ash's father, that really laid down a lot of the story, because that adds a really dark twist, but also to, kind of figure out what would happen to Ash if he found out that piece of information while he was young. And that was what sort of this almost alternate timeline tries to explore, is what would happen to a young boy who wasn't prepared to face his fears head on. And here we have Jessie and James, and I at some point early on I almost cut them from the script, but it felt wrong to do it because even if just for a moment, it was really important to get resolution for all the characters, and also to kind of see Jessie and James mature. They're always the comedians in the show, and I wanted to give them a little bit of humanity. And here we have the introduction of Misty. I love this shot, and I love this whole pool sequence. It really worked out so well because the pool was at the house, one of the house locations, and just really a beautiful way to set up Misty. I wanted her character to be more mature. She is still the Cerulean City gym leader, but even in her maturity, I wanted to show like she had a hole, because she and Ash are so close in the show that if you take Ash out of the equation, there's a hole that's left in her heart, and how would somebody like Misty, kind of fill that gap? And so, of course, we have Gary, who also is ambitious, but I wanted to show his maturity as well. And so he has definitely, he's not as, of course, competitive with Ash, but being with Misty, that, he thinks that's the right thing to do. And in the subtext of the movie, Gary thinks that his grandfather wants him to be more like Ash and wants him to have more, wants him to settle down, essentially. So he's have found maybe some temporary happiness with Misty. So that's where that's where they are at this point. And now we have this really beautiful, I think it's really cool scene between Ash and Misty in the kitchen, which was another scene that was built early on into the script, because you have these, of course, two characters reuniting after a very long time.
We had no idea where you were,
But
Ash.
I really loved working with these actors and seeing what they could do with the scene. I think it's extremely credible. I love the performances. And you can even hear the music's completely dropped out. This is one of the few scenes in the movie without any music. And it's because we want to have that emotional realism. And I hope that it is meaningful, and I hope it's cool because you have both characters making some pretty big revelations. And
it's late.
Yeah, I'm glad that the writing came through. It was a lot of drafts to get it where it is now. So starting here, this whole next sequence of shots is very different from what they were in the script. In the script, on the page, it seemed like they were going to work out, but when it was on the screen, it didn't send the whole story. And a big part of that was Gary, because Gary's character came across too vague. So we actually went back and did some ADR lines with Gary to try to fill in his story a little bit more, kind of trying to explain how he felt like his grandfather didn't really appreciate him, or he didn't live up to his grandfather's expectations. But also the restructuring was done to better shape the emotions and, kind of the push towards this scene. But you got to be okay with that. You have to be okay with rethinking what you thought was good and making it work on the screen. Now, this is the third flashback, and was always going to be the kind of the linchpin of the movie, where we find out this big important piece of information. And in any really good script, you'll have a moment where the character makes an incorrect decision, and that's what this scene is. In our script, it happens in the past, but Ash choosing to run away and separate himself from his friends and family as adverse to facing his fears or uniting with his friends and family. But he's very young, and like I say, him finding out this piece of information really opened up a lot of ideas once I had that in the script.
I'll come back someday.
It was really fun to kind of just see how deep we could go, and some tears involved there. You can see in color we actually desaturated that whole scene. So playing a lot with different colors throughout the film. This sequence was also fun because we had to sort of trash the lab there. And right there, this transition where Ash walks in front of the camera, again, another on-set discovery. So you always want to be open to that and see if there's a good opportunity to do something you couldn't foresee. And throughout this scene, and really throughout the whole movie, you could hear how unique our musical score was for this film. Our previous two films paid homage to the big composers, John Williams, Michael Giacchino. And this third time working with Daniel Ellis, it was such a blessing to be able to allow him to pretty much go nuts and make this his own. we had many great conversations about the tonality, but also how do we add a new level of depth to the drama and to the realism. So there were of course, some choices to take music out, but also to have music that was really a tonal texture. So you can hear this whole section, this very subtle, slow building section, is to build this grinding tension. And every time Daniel would send me a draft of this scene, I'd say more, and we eventually got it to, tell the story, all in like kind of subtones and different sound effects, kind of tell the sub story of the escalation throughout that whole sequence. And all the visual effects that you're about to see were done by Vincent Glazer, and he really made this scene. He went above and beyond. Rain, he actually provided photography. He went out and took photos of a rainy day to replace the sky, the lightning, and integrating, of course, the Pikachu and the VFX and into the live action. And we spent 6 months on all this stuff, and it was a grind, but I feel it's super rewarding to really show this final climax for Ash Ketchum, getting a chance to say that he's sorry to his mom, apologizing for his mistakes, and ultimately choosing his friends and family, choosing to stand up for himself, and choosing who he wants to be in life. And it's, of course, rewarded with his friend Pikachu coming to save everyone. And it was so fun to have this conversation about the character of Pikachu. I actually had to go back into the director's seat, half a year after we shot the film, just to create the new character. What is Pikachu thinking? What's he feeling? And we, of course, have the rainbow symbolizing Ho-Oh. All of that was a big homage to the very first episode of Pokemon. So, really, wanted to make sure people who even saw the first episode could understand this whole thing. And now we see the letter from Professor Oak to his grandson. And this letter kind of reveals to Gary that his grandfather was proud of him no matter what. Gary sort of has this false idea that he has to be more like Ash. And I wanted him to have the opposite journey from Ash. A similar path, but sort of in the opposite direction, where he had chosen to sort of settle down, but sort of realizes now that he has to continue to pursue what he really wants. And that's a big part of the story too, is uncovering, the truth, uncovering what we want out of life, and that's the struggle of life, is figuring out who we are. And right there, he's holding the pendant that you see in the anime, and it never really had a meaning, but we decided to go ahead and make it kind of symbolize. It's a very, you wouldn't know this, but sort of that his grandfather gave it to him, and that pendant represents his grandfather. Now, this scene right here, where Misty discovers the bicycle, this has been in the script since the very beginning. It was really the image in my mind of, Misty finally getting her bicycle back after 17 years, and Ash finally fulfilling on his promise. And I always knew that I was working toward that scene, so I'm really happy that it came out pretty much how I first originally envisioned it. So we sort of leave it a little open there. For me, this happens maybe a couple months later, this scene. I really loved creating all these character costumes, talking about, okay, what would they look like in the future? How do we modify them? Either keep them the same, or in this case, create a little miniature Ash Ketchum costume for Lola, as well as a kind of a new and improved Professor Ash costume for Ash. And it's really about passing the torch. It's really about Ash figuring out who he is meant to be, but giving the gifts and the joy of Pokemon and friendship to the next generation. And because everyone's united, because we finally have our Trinity, Ash, Misty, Brock back together, they can finally sort of become a new family, kind of get a second chance to restart. That's what this is supposed to be, is they're all a big family. This is, of course, meant to be another Pikachu. Not the same Pikachu, but it's got the lightning bolt on the ball. And in this time, we need to remember what's important in life. We need to never forget our friends and family. We always need to make sure that we do everything we can to spread love. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Boy, I really had a great time making this film. This is actually the very last thing that I'm doing for the Blu-ray and DVDs. So it's really been a journey to get to this point. It was trials and tribulations sometimes, as usual. But seeing everyone come together one more time, this was sort of our last chance to do this. We are all moving on, and that's kind of the big reason why I did this, is because, I'm moving on in my life, and my story was, where do I go next, and how do I take responsibility for who I am, and I'm looking to try to get into the writing field. We'll see where that goes. Only time will tell. In reflecting on the last 7 years, all these names, collection of over 100 artists and over 100 contributors we've gained this, took 3 films to gain this much support, and that will always be with me, is how many amazing people chose to have faith in me and provide their own unique talent and voice. And so when I look at the film, I see those people. If you're not doing it for the people, you're not doing it for the right reasons, at least with these independent films. And this whole project's dedicated to the original creators of Pokémon and the English voice cast who really shaped my childhood. So thank you so much to them. We made this as a gift to you, and we love and respect everything you did. And I look forward someday to making something that speaks to people that is all my own someday. So with any luck, I hope that someday I'll be able to give something that create something this meaningful that helps people live the best life they can. Thanks for listening, and thank you so much for making this the very best, like no film ever was.